Hello! So, welcome to the first of my shitty medieval history podcasts. Done with my shitty iPhone in the rain. This is totally unscripted. I've no idea what I'm doing really, so it'll probably be awful. But it's just an experiment, so bear with me. So what I want to do today is take a look at the castle of Newcastle Emlyn, which you can see over there in all its glory, all what's left of it, and just speak a little bit about the history of the place, and hopefully that will be reasonably entertaining. If you look over there, you can see that the River Towy has burst its banks just about. It's atrocious weather at the moment, but I find personally that Welsh castles in the rain are more atmospheric, if a little bit more difficult to get around. So I'm approaching the castle right now, obviously. Where I am right now, if you look at these bumps in the ground, if I scan over them, these are actually not just random bumps and bumps, they are the remains of what was the outer wall of the castle. So these would have been outer fortifications. And to give an idea of how steep they are, I'm going to try and climb up one of them in the mud and the rain, and very well fall over. But here we go. This is history in action, living history. Imagine being some poor guy trying to storm this place 700 years ago, toiling up this hill. There'd be a timber rampart at the top here where I'm standing now, this walkway, and obviously some guys guarding it, spears and rocks and all sorts of wonderful things down on your head. Not very pleasant. But here we have the inner ward, the gatehouse, which is the main remaining part of the castle. I'm very familiar with this castle because I've lived around this area for about 2/3 of my life. I've been in and out of these ruins more times than I can remember, but it's always interesting. You always find something new to look at. So where I am now, on my left is one of the guardhouses where the sentries would have slept and had their meals. Over here is something interesting. This was only excavated about 20 years ago. This is the garderobe, or the toilet. You can see the arch down there where some poor luckless peasant would have had to dig out the shit after everyone had finished their business in here, and it was all getting piled up and a bit messy and rancid. So there we go, genuine medieval toilet for you. Guardhouse, like I said, and then walkway in the middle, and then another guardhouse over here, and you can see two slit windows, arrow slit windows. I should imagine that these would have been significantly narrower when the castle was occupied, because otherwise, if you look at this one for instance, I could actually jump through this, which is not ideal in terms of defence. And then over here, if I traipse through the guardhouse and then through this little corridor here, this is the remains of the bakehouse and the kitchens. It doesn't look like much these days, but if you look at this spire of rock here, that I believe is the remains of the hearth. And they go to quite some efforts to preserve this particular part of the castle because the masonry is quite fragile. I don't know if you can see, but there's fault lines all through the rock, and in weather like this, battered constantly in the winter months, week after week, it's in quite serious danger of falling over, just as I am if I don't watch my footing. So this is, as I said, the gatehouse, and then you get into the inner ward, this section here. Over there is a modern sculpture that is supposed to be a dragon with its wings folded. It looks rather like a penis, unfortunately, an erect penis, which I've never been certain was a deliberate joke on the part of a sculptor or entirely unintentional. But at any rate, it's not an original feature. It was put up about 10 years ago, I think. But so really here, this is the line of the curtain wall of the inner ward leading up to the gatehouse, and it's from here really that you get an idea of the defences of this place. Very steep man-made hill down to the track leading by the river below, and if you imagine all of this undergrowth and brambles and trees cleared away, and a stone wall guarding this perimeter, because the inner wall had been made of stone, these defences would have been quite formidable actually. So a little bit about the actual history of the castle while I focus on the gatehouse and the rain gets over my phone. I'm more familiar with the origins of it. It was built in about 1240 by a Welsh prince named Maledydd ap Rhys Gryg. He was the son of a chap called Rhys Gryg, or Rhys the Horse, who was himself the son of the Lord Rhys, who was lord of much of South Wales really, and had been made justiciar of South Wales by the King of England, Henry II. Now the Lord Rhys was one of these great figures in Welsh medieval history, one of these great unifying figures, but as usual it all sort of fell apart on his death because he had several sons and they all fell to squabbling over the inheritance. And there were lots of wars in this part of Wales between Rhys's sons and grandsons. But Meredydd, the chap who built this castle in about 1240, he came out on top eventually, temporarily, and for a time was powerful enough to build castles like this. I think he was also involved in the construction of castles at Dinefwr and Cresloyn, which are, they lie about 25 miles away, further up the Towy Valley, outside Carmarthen. So this was originally a Welsh castle. In 1287, over 40 years after the castle was built, Meredydd's son, Rhys ap Meredydd, he rebelled against the English crown. He had previously been an ally of the King of England, Edward I, but he decided he eventually wasn't happy with that arrangement. And in 1287, while Edward was abroad, Rhys rose in revolt against the English, and this castle at Emlyn, was part of his inheritance. Now let me get the sequence of events correct. Yes, it had an English garrison. It had been given over to the custody of a man named Roger Mortimer. Roger Mortimer of Gennar Glyn. He was a cousin of the main Mortimer branch of Wigmore in Shropshire on the Welsh marches, and he was employed regularly as an English constable and English officer in this part of West Wales. But one night in 1287, at the height of Rhys's revolt, Rhys and his men attacked this place, and if you can imagine them swarming up this hillside under cover of darkness by moonlight, something like that. They got over the walls, they killed some of the defenders, some of the garrison, so presumably they would have leapt over the walls and grabbed the sentries and cut their throats, all very sort of dramatic Hollywood type stuff. And they took Roger Mortimer, who was presumably asleep in his bed, they took him prisoner. So Rhys managed to recapture his castle. Unfortunately for him, he didn't really have much support, either in West Wales or outside it really. It was a very isolated revolt, and the English were able to rally, and a few weeks later, if I can come down here and point my camera towards the distant car park through the entrance to the gateway there, a few weeks later, the justiciar of South Wales, Robert Tiberto, he gathered an army and he came here to retake the castle for the English. And one of the things they did was they dragged an enormous catapult called a trebuchet all the way from Cardigan, which is how far away? About 10 miles away. Enormous contraption drawn by about 60 oxen. You can imagine this monstrous great war machine. And it was set up in the car park there, and then boulders were lobbed at the castle for about 3 days, and the Welsh defenders were totally surrounded, bombarded with these enormous rocks pelting down on their heads. And at the end of 3 days, they surrendered because nobody was coming to help them. Rhys himself had escaped. When the castle was taken, he was nowhere to be found, so presumably he had slipped over the wall here and snuck away at night into the woods. And the castle was retaken. And Newcastle Emlyn remained an English-held castle for the next 100 years, really. It was retaken by the Welsh under Emlyn, the famous Welsh freedom fighter in the early 15th century. But when his revolt fizzled out after a few years, it was once again reclaimed by the English. But by this point, Emlyn lost its main reason to exist, really. It was no longer an outpost, it was no longer a useful garrison fort. It was just one of these castles that were expensive to maintain, and really the government in England spent the minimum amount of effort and money on the upkeep. Some of the accounts in the 14th century and 15th century onwards, they show that the roof was falling in, the walls constantly needed repairs, and there was really a minimal staff here. There were no more than half a dozen men employed here to just look after the place. So yeah, it's raining quite hard now, and I've been at this for 11 minutes, as I said, totally unscripted. I'm going to try and upload this later. I don't know if it'll work or not, but I mean, that isn't the end of the history of Emlyn Castle by any means, but I don't really want to get any wetter, so I'll sign off for now. Thank you.